Welcome back to Race Report, everyone. We have just completed the Japanese Grand Prix for the first time in a long time. It's good to be back at Suzuka, but how did everything go? Let's get stuck straight in, shall we? First, I will say coming into the race weekend, we did have some driver news, and it came in the form of Pierre Gasly making a switch to Alpine next year. He's leaving AlphaTauri. And AlphaTauri are replacing Pierre Gasly with Nick De Vries. So a good couple of moves there. Gasly joins Ocon at Alpine, an all-French team now. Nick De Vries, after impressing in his debut for Williams, gets a full-time drive at AlphaTauri. That's an interesting switch, as he has classically and historically been a Mercedes driver. He is now a Red Bull one instead, so that's very interesting indeed. We also did hear that Daniel Ricciardo will not be on the grid next year. He's decided to take a sabbatical and try and get a 2024 drive. So that's a shame. Daniel Ricciardo is very popular and I quite like him a lot. So it's going to be very sad not to see him on the grid next year. Away from the driver moves, this was a critical race, as we knew that Max Verstappen could win the championship if he won this race with the fastest lap. But the real question is, did he? So let's get stuck into the weekend itself, starting with qualifying as usual. Qualifying was dry, the only part of the weekend that was dry. Practice was wet, the race was wet, but qualifying was very dry. So we had a very normal looking grid, to be honest. Out in Q1 were the two Williams, Lance Stroll, Kevin Magnussen and Pierre Gasly. Out in Q2 we had both the Alfa Romeos, Schumacher, Tsunoda and Ricciardo. That did mean that Sebastian Vettel got into Q3 while his teammate Lance Stroll was actually the second slowest car. So a massive difference between those two, and it's always good to see Vettel get into Q3 as well. We did have a little bit of drama in Q3 when Norris had to take to the grass for avoiding action, as Verstappen had a little bit of a moment. It was investigated and no penalty was given to Verstappen. So at the end of qualifying, it did end with Verstappen on pole, Leclerc in second place and Sainz in third. The Alpines were looking very sharp in their battle for fourth in the championship as well. The race itself started on a wet track, as I said earlier. We did start on the Inters. There was a great battle off the line between Verstappen and Leclerc. Leclerc seemed to get the better jump, but Verstappen in that second and third phase came right back at him. And it was a great battle between those two. Unfortunately, behind them, it was very messy. Alonso and Vettel had a bit of a tussle, ended in a Vettel spin. Sainz aquaplaned into the barriers. A big piece of barrier somehow got stuck on the front of Gasly's car. Albon had a mechanical failure, and Zhou had an unassisted spin. All of that on lap 1. So as you can imagine, led to a safety car. Lap 1, lap 2, we had the race red flagged for being too wet. This immediately brought out questions of, again, why aren't we allowed to use these wet weather tyres that the cars have? We have these wet weather tyres. Why are we not able to race in the wet if we've got these wet weather tyres? It's a good question. I don't think it was super relevant for this race, however, because as soon as the cars were underway, you could see by the rooster tails that were coming off the back that there was just no visibility at all. It looked terrible. It looked terrible from a viewer's standpoint as well, because you couldn't really see the cars too much through all the spray. So, fair play. There wasn't a lot they could do about this one, I don't think. But whilst we were on the red flag lap, whilst the cars were coming in, there was a very, very, very scary incident. An incredibly scary incident. There was a recovery truck on the track at the same time the cars were on the track. There are videos from Gasly's onboard perspective, which is very, very concerning. Like, number one, Gasly was speeding under the red flag. Obviously, big no-no. He got his penalty for that. But number two, he went past a recovery truck that he couldn't see because the visibility was so bad. So, it totally brought back memories of Bianchi's incident at this very racetrack. And I thought we were done. I thought the FIA had learned their lesson. They were no longer deploying these trucks onto live tracks, even if it was a red flag, and but the cars were still on the track. All they had to do was wait, 5 minutes. and then they could deploy it. There'd be no cars on track, everything would be fine. They didn't do that, and the incident itself, again, another instance of the FIA being farcical, being dumb. Learn from your mistakes, FIA. Come on, we've had this happen. Very recent past. Fix it. Don't do it again. And the worst thing about this I found was when I was going back and watching all the highlight packages, nobody's talking about it. It's not in the highlight packages. There's no discussion from Sky Sports or anything like that about it. So who's holding the FIA accountable? I saw some drivers talk about it, which is very good. They're the ones that are going to really need to push this, because it doesn't seem like any of the media are really. So that's a shame. Are we going to let the FIA get away with this and keep doing this? I don't think we should, right? Anyway, regardless of all of that, we go racing again, and now we're down to a timer because we've had a 2-hour delay. So we're on a timer now, and we've got 39 minutes left of the race. And the cars are back out on track. They're on full wets this time. So yay, the wets have come out. And again, they're still rooster tailing. It's still pretty bad visibility, but we are underway again. Vettel and Latifi, who are at the back of the grid, pit for Inters almost immediately. They're at the back of the grid. They got nothing to lose. So they stick on Inters. They try and get up the grid that way. It takes the other teams to about lap 8, which I think it was about 4 minutes later, if that makes any sense, before they start switching over. And at this point, it is everybody going over to the Inters, which actually helps Vettel and Latifi. Obviously, they've already pitted. They pitted, a couple minutes ago. So as other drivers are coming in, Vettel and Latifi moving up the order. And we'll see that comes very relevant toward the end of the race. We did see some decent fights up and down. We saw a good fight for 4th place between Hamilton and Ocon. We saw some good overtaking maneuvers with some drivers that were trying to stay out on the wet tires. So, for instance, Mick Schumacher stayed out, and Verstappen and Leclerc had to get past him. Zhou stayed out. He was running 4th at one stage. It was very cool, very interesting to see. Obviously did not help their races at all. They did have to pit for Inters, and because it happened late, they were not able to get past anybody else. So ultimately crippled their races. They probably were hoping to try and get to the end. They didn't, but it provided us some on-track action where in a period where there wasn't a lot, because obviously with so little visibility, the drivers are not going to be following closely behind each other. So everybody was neatly spaced out, and there wasn't too much action, to be honest. There was a little bit more action though, right at the very end. We had a massive fight on the very, very last lap between Perez, who was in 3rd place, and Leclerc, who was in 2nd place. And Leclerc goes off at the final corner. He does cut the chicane. He comes back onto the track and crosses the line. So he still takes 2nd place across the line, but almost immediately gets given a 5-second penalty for leaving the track and gaining an advantage. It's because he didn't gain a place, but he definitely didn't lose his place. So they give him a penalty for that. I think that's fair. I don't think anybody can quibble about that. But while all that's going on, it means Max Verstappen has won the race. He just drove off into the distance after the race restarted, honestly. So he won pretty easily, and as a result becomes world champion for 2022. There was massive confusion about that as well, let me tell you. Man, nobody knew what was going on at the end of this race. It's so strange. So because the race it just got over a little bit over half distance, lap count wise. So nobody knew how many points were going to be awarded. Was it going to be half points? Was it going to be 3rd points? Was it going to be full points? Nobody really knew, because the rules were rewritten after Belgium last year, and everybody assumed it was going to be half points. So most people were like, oh, Max Verstappen's not champion, we didn't do enough laps. And then somebody had to go check the rule book really quickly and come into the podium room and go, yeah, you're world champion now. So that kind of took the shine off it a little bit, because obviously you want that moment where the driver's in the car, they cross the finish line, they're celebrating madly, they're their team's on the radio going, well done, you're world champion, all that. We didn't get any of that. Verstappen didn't get any of that, which is a shame for him, and because he deserves it. He's driven a fantastic season, and he deserves to be world champion. Not in this fashion, I think. This fashion was a bit silly, bit dumb. You know, like nobody even knew he was champion when he crossed the finish line. But that's the way it goes sometimes, I guess. It was a question of when he'd be world champion after all, rather than if, because after the summer break, he just dominated. Ferrari couldn't keep up with him, Leclerc couldn't keep up with him. So he is a worthy champion, and of course, it just wouldn't be a Verstappen World Championship win without a bonkers race to go with it, right? So that's what we got. You know, for better or for worse, it's a bad spectacle. It's a shame, right? Because both Verstappen's championship winning races have come in bad spectacles for the sport. You're like a casual fan, maybe you're a first-time fan that's checking in on the race where the championship was won for the last 2 years. I don't imagine you know what's going on, because a lot of regular fans and pundits didn't know what was going on. Such a shame. It makes F1 look bad, I think. But at least this year we have more races to go. So now the attention can turn to the constructors, because theoretically Ferrari are still in that fight, and there are more places up and down the table to be decided. We don't know where Mercedes is going to end up yet. We don't know how that battle for fourth place between Alpine and McLaren is going to go. These are all to be decided. That's where the focus now transitions to. But at the end of the day, what did you think of the race? There's a lot to talk about here. There's the stuff before the race where, we had driver moves, which is great. We had the Gasly incident and the tractor. That really gets me riled up. I'd love to hear what you're thinking about that. And what do you think of Verstappen's championship win? I mean, again, I kind of went over my point of it feels like it's a shame because he deserved to be a champion. However, he didn't really get the moment, that he probably deserves in this race. So it's a bit of a shame from my point of view, but what do you think? Let me know in the comments. Let me know over on social media @RaceReportPod, and I will catch you in the next one.